Hey there, my name is Cameron, also known as Venus Theory, and in this video I wanted to share with you an easy processing chain to get those haunting, crunchy ambient vocal chops you hear all over the darker styles of trap and R&B and the alt-pop scene. These types of vocals are really simple to create in Cubase using only the built-in tools and can make for a great intro, bridge, drop element, or just to add a little bit of spice to your track. Let's take a listen to the final result and then we'll break down how it was made. Alright, so here we are in the session, and to kick things off, we need a vocal sample to use. I've used these two samples here.
Whoa.
These aren't really anything crazy, but all we need is a vocal with either some tones or phrases we want to use. The great thing about this is with the amount of processing that's going to be involved in creating the final product, you can really use any vocal you want regardless of the key or pitchiness of it. You could even record your own vocals, and even if you can't sing all that well, it doesn't really matter. So that's a very easy way to get some unique samples to use for your track. To get things cooking here, I took these vocals and brought them into a groove agent and created a few different slices here, as you can see, by just dragging one of the samples on and then copying it. To do that, you can just hold Alt and drag it over, and you'll see this little plus icon here, and that will copy it over to that pad. Then I went through and just chopped out different sections of these vocals. If we take a look here, this is the same sample across these bottom four pads, but if we look at the actual pads, you'll see that the chops are a little bit different. This is a great trick to get a lot of different sounds out of just a few very short samples. I've only got 2 samples, but I've got 14 different pads here of individual hits we can use to craft the vocal chop line. Next up, to bring everything in key with our project, I used a pitch correct here, and I shifted the formants down. If you don't know what formants are, that's like the shape of your throat as you speak. So by shifting it down, you can get this dark kind of throaty, darker sound like that, and I turned it to female mode. That just sounded best, and left the formant preservation on. For the correction, I've set the speed to 100, the tolerance to 9, and I left the transpose alone because we're going to transpose the individual slices inside of Groove Agent instead. Then I used a custom scale. This beat is in the key of C minor, so I just picked a few notes from C minor in order to tune these to the key of the track. Within Groove Agent, I just used the coarse tune to tune these individual hits to something that sounded a bit better, so if we go through a few of these, you can hear we've got the same samples, but I've used the coarse tune to tune them differently. That way we've got just a bunch of different little hits to use. Now let's talk post-processing. First, I called up a VST amp rack. There's no pre-effects. I set the amplifier to tweed. The cabinet is off, and then there's no post-effects. The microphones are at the default configuration I left in mono. You could switch this to stereo if you have any stereo information in your samples. In this case, I don't, so mono is fine, and the master is left alone. If we bypass this amp rack and take a listen, the vocal chops don't sound bad, they just maybe sound a bit sterile, but once we bring this in, it adds this really nice, crunchy, gritty, sampled feel. But the problem at this point is that these are a bit over distorted and kind of too crunchy. So what I did is actually use a frequency before the amp and pitch correction to clean this up a bit. With this EQ, I got rid of all the lower information. That way we're not getting that overblown, distorted sound. And I added a bit of high end here at around 7K for clarity, and then shaved things off at about 15K because everything above that's just unnecessary and it's really just going to add hiss. After that EQ has been added, you'll hear these vocal chops have that nice distorted tone, but they sound a lot more clear. To get things to sound a bit more interesting, I would definitely check out the multitap delay plugin. I just went through some presets here and found this one, which is ambient chords, which really spices this vocal up a bit. this is a really fun effect to get creative with because you can insert things for the individual delay taps. You can also go into the loop effects and add different effects into the loop back of the delay path, which is a lot of fun to get really experimental and weird with, but the presets are also really good. So just finding a nice preset to use on top of your vocals can be a good way to add some dimension and interest to them overall. At this point, things should be sounding pretty good, but to smooth out the overall choppiness of everything, I like to bring in a subtle reverb usually. So I've got about a 2.5 second reverb mixed in about 40%. This is just Roomworks SE. I think all of these are the default settings actually. And once we bring this in, it just smooths out the overall feel of the chops and blurs that multi-tap a little bit. You could adjust the mix here to be a bit more dry if you want more of that modulated multi-tap delay effect. Otherwise, if you want to smooth things out and kind of push this more to the background of the beat, you could increase the mix. For a bit more control, since these vocal chops are pretty loud and also pretty dynamic, I've used a tube compressor here, added a lot of drive, a lot of character. I have a very fast attack, and the release is at 510 milliseconds. I increased the input because we don't necessarily have a regular threshold control with the tube compressor, but what I'm aiming for is a pretty hefty reduction. As you can see, about 14 dB here. This ends up making these vocals very controlled because we're squishing out a lot of the dynamic range, which makes them a little bit easier to mix, but do be careful not to over-compress, or else you might get things that just sound a bit too brick-walled and crushed. The other cool thing of note here is that this is coming after the reverb and after the multi-tap, so do experiment with the position of your compressor, because with this coming after the reverb and the multi-tap, we're lifting up the tail of those things, and we make this vocal sound a lot larger, but if you put it before those will be a bit more gentle and subtle in the mix. Finally, after that, you'll usually want to add just a little bit of EQ to control things a bit more. With the distortion and the tube compressor and stuff like that, we end up getting a bit more low end, and the reverb especially can add some unnecessary lows, so I've cut that all out once again. I've taken out a little bit of 500 hertz. It was getting a little bit honky there. I've added some clarity at about 1K and a little bit more presence at about 8K. So before this EQ and after, which thins it out quite a bit and makes it sit a lot better in the mix. And that's about all there is to it. With a little bit of practice and patience, you can easily transform basic samples into these really cool vocal chops in only a couple of minutes. So thanks for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you learned something. For more information on Cubase, you can visit steinberg.net, and for all things Cubase and more tutorials like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel down below.